In the dark realms of true crime, the name Jeffrey Dahmer looms like a sinister spectre. A figure of pure terror, he is known as the Monster of Milwaukee, or the Milwaukee Cannibal. Dahmer's life was a haunting odyssey into the abyss of darkness. Born on May 21, 1960, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Jeffrey Dahmer was the first of two sons to parents Lionel, a chemistry student turned research chemist, and Joyce, a teletype machine instructor. Lionel had German and Welsh roots, while Joyce's ancestry included English, Norwegian, and Irish heritage. His mother was known for her anxiety, attention-seeking behaviour, and arguments with her husband and neighbours, whereas Lionel's academic pursuits often kept him away from home. The family moved several times, eventually settling in Bath Township, Ohio, in May 1968. It was during this time that Jeffrey's fascination with dead animals took root. His interest may have been triggered when he observed his father removing animal bones from beneath their house at the age of 4. Dahmer started collecting these bones, referring to them as fiddlesticks. He also explored around the house for additional bones and dissected live animals to understand their bone structures. In 1975, Dahmer's father taught him how to bleach and preserve animal bones. He extended these techniques to collect dead animals, including roadkill, which he would dissect and bury, sometimes displaying their skulls on makeshift crosses. As Dahmer's bizarre interests grew, his mother increased her consumption of prescription medication, distancing herself further from her family. Starting from his freshman year at Revere High School, Dahmer was viewed as an outsider. At the tender age of 14, he had already embarked on a path of daytime drinking, cleverly hiding his alcoholic indulgences within the confines of his school jacket. To one classmate's inquiry about his morning scotch, Dahmer cryptically referred to it as his medicine. Though often reserved, his freshman year portrayed him as a courteous and intelligent student with average grades. He dabbled in extracurricular activities, competing in tennis, and briefly joining the high school band. It was during his adolescent years that Dahmer came to terms with his homosexuality, a secret he kept from his parents. In his early teens, he had a fleeting relationship with another boy, though they never consummated their connection. Dahmer's desires, however, grew more complex. He began fantasizing about total dominance over a submissive male partner, the focus shifting towards chests and torsos, and these dark thoughts gradually blended with his love for dissection. Around the age of 16, Dahmer concocted a disturbing fantasy of rendering an attractive male jogger unconscious, then subjecting him to unspeakable acts. Concealing himself in bushes with a baseball bat on one occasion, he lay in wait for this man, but the jogger never appeared. This marked his first failed attempt to assert control over another individual. In high school, Dahmer often played the role of the class clown, delighting in staging pranks that became known as doing a Dahmer. These antics included feigning epileptic seizures or cerebral palsy at school and local stores. Sometimes he even performed these acts for financial gain, all in the pursuit of buying more alcohol. By 1977, his academic performance had faltered. His parents hired a private tutor in a bid to turn things around, but to limited avail. That same year, his parents, in an attempt to salvage their marriage, turned to counselling. Nevertheless, their relationship continued to deteriorate, and when Lionel discovered Joyce's brief affair in September 1977, they decided to divorce. They initially presented it as an amicable decision to their sons, but the process soon devolved into a contentious battle, leading Lionel to move out of the family home in early 1978. In May 1978, Dahmer graduated from high school. In the weeks leading up to his graduation, one of his teachers caught him in the act, drinking several cans of beer close to the school parking lot. Dahmer, under duress, cited a lot of problems at home, alluding to the guidance counselor's awareness of his situation. In the spring of 1978, Joyce, in defiance of a court order and without informing Lionel, relocated to Chippewa Falls, Wisconsin, with David, Dahmer's younger brother. In 1978, shortly after his graduation, Dahmer committed his first murder. On June 18th, he encountered a hitchhiker named Stephen Hicks, who was nearly 19 years old, while he was on his way to a rock concert. Dahmer enticed Hicks to his home under the pretext of sharing some drinks, promising a few beers since he had the house to himself. Dahmer's desires were aroused by Hicks, who was shirtless by the roadside, but any advances he considered were quashed when Hicks started talking about girls. After hours of conversation, drinks and music, Hicks expressed a desire to leave. But Dahmer wanted him to stay, so he attacked Hicks, striking him twice from behind with a 4.5-kilo dumbbell as he sat in a chair. When Hicks lost consciousness, Dahmer strangled him to death with the bar before undressing Hicks, exploring his chest and pleasuring himself over the lifeless body. Later, he moved the body to the basement. The next day, Dahmer dismembered Hicks's body in the basement and buried the remains in a shallow grave in his backyard. Several weeks later, he unearthed the remains and removed the flesh from the bones. He dissolved the flesh in acid, crushed the bones with a sledgehammer, and scattered them in the nearby woods. 6 weeks after killing Hicks, Dahmer's father and his partner returned home to find him living alone. In August, he enrolled at Ohio State University with hopes of majoring in business. However, his time here was plagued by alcohol abuse, resulting in failing grades and his withdrawal after just 3 months. In January 1979, at his father's insistence, Dahmer enlisted in the US Army. He trained as a medical specialist, but faced occasional reprimands for alcohol-related issues. Deployed to West Germany in July 1979, his early performance was satisfactory. However, Dahmer's alcohol abuse led to a decline in his military performance, and he was discharged with an honourable discharge in March 1981, as his superiors believed his problems were specific to the military. After, Dahmer moved to Miami Beach, Florida in March 1981, finding work at a deli and renting a motel room. His salary was largely spent on alcohol, leading to eviction. He eventually returned to Ohio in September of the same year, moving back in with his father and stepmother. Despite his insistence on taking up numerous chores, he continued to drink heavily, which led to his arrest for drunk and disorderly conduct within 2 weeks. His father's attempts to help him quit drinking proved futile. In December 1981, Dahmer was sent to live with his grandmother in West Allis, Wisconsin, with the hope that a change of environment and her influence would help him lead a responsible life. Initially, he adjusted well, attending church and searching for work. Dahmer found a job as a phlebotomist at the Milwaukee Blood Plasma Center in early 1982, but he was laid off after 10 months. He remained unemployed for over 2 years, relying on financial support from his grandmother. Dahmer's life took a turn when he was hired as a mixer at the Milwaukee Ambrosia Chocolate Factory in January 1985. This job had him working late nights, and during this time, an incident at a public library sparked a resurgence of his control and dominance fantasies. He began frequenting Milwaukee's gay bars, bathhouses, and bookstores. He also stole a male mannequin for stimulation, though his grandmother discovered it and had him dispose of it. By late 1985, Dahmer was regularly attending bathhouses, but grew frustrated with his partner's movements during their encounters. This led him to use sedatives to immobilize them, objectifying them for his pleasure. To maintain his supply of sedatives, he falsely claimed to doctors that he worked night shifts. After about a dozen such instances, he had his bathhouse memberships revoked and began using hotel rooms. On September 8, 1986, he was arrested for lewd and lascivious behaviour after touching himself near the Kinnickinnick River in the presence of 2 preteen boys. Initially, he claimed he was urinating, but he later confessed to the offence, He was charged with disorderly conduct, receiving 1 year of probation and counselling requirements. On November 20th, 1987, while living with his grandmother in West Allis, Dahmer met Stephen Tuomi, a 25-year-old from Michigan, at a bar. He convinced Tuomi to go with him to the Ambassador Hotel in Milwaukee, where Dahmer had a rented room. Originally, Dahmer didn't plan to harm Tuomi. He wanted to drug him and explore his body while he lay beside him. However, the next morning, Dahmer found Tuomi dead with severe injuries, but he had no memory of the killing. Dahmer purchased a large suitcase to transport Tuomi's body to his grandmother's house. A week later, he dismembered the body, removing the flesh from the bones, which he put in plastic garbage bags. The bones were wrapped in a sheet and shattered with a sledgehammer. The entire dismemberment process took about 2 hours, and all Tuomi's remains except the head were thrown in the trash. Dahmer kept Tuomi's head wrapped in a blanket for 2 weeks, and later tried to preserve the skull by boiling it in a mixture of soilax and bleach, which he used for stimulation. Eventually, the skull became too brittle, so Dahmer pulverized and disposed of it. According to Dahmer, the murder of Stephen Tuomi was a turning point that intensified his compulsions. He began actively seeking victims, typically meeting them in gay bars and luring them to his grandmother's home. After engaging in sexual activity with the victims, he drugged and strangled them while unconscious. 2 months after Tuomi's murder, Dahmer encountered 14-year-old James Dockstater, a Native American escort. Dahmer lured him to his grandmother's house under the guise of posing for nude photos, but he drugged and strangled Dockstater. He left the body in the cellar for a week before dismembering it similarly to Tuomi, disposing of all remains except the head, which he tried to preserve but later destroyed. In March 1988, Dahmer met 22-year-old Richard Guerrero at a gay bar and lured him to his grandmother's residence, where he drugged, strangled, and engaged in sexual acts with Guerrero. Dahmer dismembered Guerrero's body and retained the skull. The following month, on April 23rd, Dahmer lured Ronald Flowers Jr. to his house, but his grandmother's presence prevented him from killing him. Instead, he let Flowers become unconscious and took him to a hospital. In September 1988, Dahmer's grandmother asked him to move out due to his drinking, late-night visitors, and the foul odours that lingered in the house. Dahmer relocated to a 1-bedroom apartment, but 2 days later, he was arrested for drugging and abusing a 13-year-old boy. Dahmer's father hired an attorney, Gerald Boyle, to defend him, and Dahmer underwent psychological evaluations that revealed feelings of alienation, impulsivity, and a schizoid personality disorder diagnosis. In January 1989, Dahmer pleaded guilty to sexual assault charges, and his sentencing was set for May. While on Easter break in March, he moved back to his grandmother's home. 2 months after his conviction, he murdered Anthony Sears, a mixed-race model he met at a gay bar. The following day, Dahmer tried to dismember Sears but retained his head and genitalia in acetone, which he stored in a box. In May 1989, Dahmer was sentenced to probation, a year in the House of Correction, and required to register as a sex offender. He was later paroled 2 months before his scheduled release, temporarily moving back to his grandmother's home. Between 1989 and 1991, Jeffrey Dahmer embarked on a disgusting spree of violence that would forever stain his name in infamy. His victims became unwitting participants in a horrifying sequence of events. Dahmer's modus operandi was insidiously calculated. He would lure his victims to his apartment under the pretense of companionship, enticing them with promises of money or alcohol. Young and unsuspecting, they often saw no reason to decline his offers, unaware of the unfathomable horrors that awaited them. Once inside his lair, Dahmer would administer drugs to incapacitate his victims. The substances he employed were instruments of his sinister will, rendering his prey helpless and susceptible to his malevolent desires. It was at this point that the true extent of his depraved soul was revealed. Sexual assault became a dark and grotesque routine in these sinister rituals. His victims, powerless under the influence of drugs, would suffer the most degrading and dehumanizing abuse imaginable. It was a harrowing violation of their most fundamental rights and dignity. Tragically, for many of these young men, the nightmare did not end with the assault. It escalated into an abyss of unimaginable horror as Dahmer chose to extinguish their lives. Murder became the grim finality of his acts, shattering any hope of escape or redemption for his victims. The brutality did not stop at murder. In a chilling display of depravity, Dahmer proceeded to dismember his victims. The act of dismemberment was a grotesque exercise in cruelty, where he reduced their lifeless bodies to pieces, an act that defied reason and humanity. Their remains, now fragmented, became eerie relics of his evil. Perhaps even more chilling was his inclination to keep these macabre trophies in his apartment. The remains of his victims occupied a space that should have been one of comfort and safety, but had been transformed into a chamber of horrors. The very walls that should have offered shelter now concealed the unspeakable evidence of his crimes. The string of murders committed by Dahmer during this period transcended the boundaries of human comprehension. The victims, in the prime of their lives, were robbed of their future, while their families and loved ones were left to grapple with the profound and enduring grief that his actions had wrought. On the fateful day of July 22, 1991, a series of chilling events transpired that would forever expose the horrifying depths of Jeffrey Dahmer's depravity. 3 men, one of them being 32-year-old Tracy Edwards, were approached by Dahmer with a sinister offer. He enticed them with the promise of $100, inviting them to his apartment under the guise of posing for nude photographs, sharing drinks, and keeping him company. While 2 of them could not be convinced, Tracy decided to go. Inside Dahmer's apartment, a putrid odour hung heavy in the air, and disturbing items hinted at the horrors within. Boxes of hydrochloric acid lay strewn across the floor, ostensibly for cleaning purposes. As Edwards entered, he could not ignore the foul atmosphere and began to question his safety. Dahmer's intentions soon became clear. He handcuffed Edwards, revealing a terrifying shift in his demeanour. Suddenly, Dahmer brandished a knife, revealing his true malevolent intent. In an attempt to stall Dahmer's unthinkable plan, Edwards unbuttoned his shirt, promising cooperation in exchange for freedom from the handcuffs and the absence of the menacing knife. Dahmer, momentarily distracted, turned his attention to the TV. It was Edwards' chance for escape. He seized this fleeting moment, stating he needed to use the bathroom. He proposed they return to the living room, where the air conditioning offered relief, a suggestion to which Dahmer agreed. As they left the bathroom, Edwards saw his opportunity to flee. With incredible courage, Edwards punched Dahmer in the face, sending him off balance. He raced out the front door, flagging down 2 Milwaukee police officers, Robert Routh and Rolf Mueller, who were patrolling nearby. Still cuffed, Edwards recounted his harrowing ordeal to the officers. He had been held captive for hours by a man he described as a freak. The handcuffs were a visible testament to the horrors he had endured. Upon arriving at Dahmer's apartment, Edwards confirmed the chilling facts to the officers. Dahmer had indeed handcuffed him and brandished a knife in the bedroom. The officers were now in the very lair of a serial killer. Dahmer was forthcoming about the handcuffs, but offered no explanation for his actions. In a bedroom drawer, the officers found scores of Polaroid pictures, each one revealing the gruesome dismemberment of human bodies, taken within the very apartment they now stood in. Their chilling discovery prompted the words, "These are for real." Dahmer's reaction to being caught was violent as he struggled against the officers who had uncovered his gruesome secret. Handcuffed and overpowered, he muttered the haunting words, "For what I did, I should be dead." The search of the apartment unveiled an appalling scene. 4 severed heads were discovered in the kitchen. 7 skulls, some painted or bleached, were found in the bedroom and closet. Blood drippings, collected in a tray at the bottom of the refrigerator, were discovered, along with 2 human hearts and a piece of arm muscle stored in plastic bags on the shelves. The freezer revealed an entire torso and a bag containing human organs and flesh frozen to the ice. Further exploration of the apartment uncovered even more horrors. 2 entire skeletons, a pair of severed hands, 2 preserved penises, a mummified scalp, and a 57-gallon drum containing 3 dismembered torsos dissolving in an acid solution completed the grotesque scene. In total, 74 Polaroid pictures chronicled the dismemberment of Dahmer's victims. The chief medical examiner would later remark that the scene was more reminiscent of dismantling a grotesque museum than a typical crime scene, cementing Dahmer's place as one of history's most chilling and heinous criminals. In the harrowing aftermath of Jeffrey Dahmer's arrest, a chilling confession emerged. During his interrogation, the depth of his malevolence was laid bare as he confessed to the grisly murders he had committed and the unspeakable acts that had followed in their wake. His admission to the heinous crimes shocked the nation and the world. It was a stark revelation of the darkness that had dwelled within him, hidden behind a facade of normalcy. The confession was an agonizing account of the suffering he had inflicted upon his victims and the horrors he had wrought. In 1992, the wheels of justice turned as Dahmer was brought to trial to answer for the multitude of crimes he had committed. The courtroom became a stage for the most horrifying of revelations, where the families of the victims, along with the world, would bear witness to the grim details of his actions. Dahmer's trial resulted in a verdict that reflected the scale of his malevolence. He was found guilty of 17 counts of murder, each one representing an innocent life that had been extinguished by his hands. The weight of the guilty verdict served as a measure of justice, a testament to the fact that even the most heinous of crimes would not go unpunished. The sentence handed down to Dahmer was a reflection of the enormity of his crimes. He received 16 consecutive life terms in prison, each one a reminder of the lives he had taken and the suffering he had caused. It was a sentence without the possibility of parole, ensuring that he would never again walk free to commit further acts of horror. The final chapter of Jeffrey Dahmer's life played out in the unforgiving confines of the Columbia Correctional Institution in Portage, Wisconsin. Behind bars, the Milwaukee Cannibal faced a violent and brutal end that sent shockwaves through the prison system. The very institution that confined Dahmer would become the stage for his demise. On November 28, 1994, he met a grim fate at the hands of a fellow inmate, Christopher Scarver. Scarver, himself a convicted murderer, unleashed a vicious attack on Dahmer because, according to him, God made him do it, resulting in the death of one of the most notorious serial killers in history. Jeffrey Dahmer took the lives of 17 innocents, leaving behind a legacy of horror and infamy that continues to send shivers down the collective spine of society. His crimes, a chilling plunge into the darkest corners of the human psyche, serve as a haunting reminder of the potential for evil that can fester within seemingly ordinary individuals. Dahmer's descent into depravity was a journey that began with an early fascination with death and escalated into a series of murders that left families shattered and communities in shock. His gruesome acts of violence, fueled by a complex web of psychological torment, exposed the fragility of the human mind when left unchecked and the dangers this can lead to.